Hey guys, I wanted to come on here and release a word that God gave me on the Palisade fires. So, a couple of years ago, it would have been in 2022, so about 3 years ago, I started seeing the word Palisade everywhere. This is going to sound funny, but what specifically caught my attention was the Hyundai Palisade. It's a car. And I started seeing this car everywhere. And like there's a lot of them on the road, but God will just like highlight certain things to me. And this car, I just knew, like I was seeing it so many times. And more than that, it was just like really catching my attention. So it's like Palisade, Palisade. What's a Palisade? And I Googled it at the time. And a palisade, the technical definition of a palisade, is a row of sharpened sticks that basically forms an enclosure. So, kind of like a defense to keep out intruders or to keep out outsiders or to keep something inside, right? The palisade. So, think about like a row of really sharpened sticks just all together, almost like a picket fence, like a white picket fence, but think like sticks and much more closely together. Like that's the technical definition of palisade. Or it can be a cliff, something on a cliff, like a tall line of cliffs. But you guys get the visual, right? It's a defense structure that's used a lot in forts, especially like in medieval days. Like you would see a lot of palisades. So around the same time that God was speaking the word palisade to me, and I had to look up the definition for it. And this was again like back in like 2022. God was also speaking the word to me impale, impale, impale. So impale put together with palisade, I was like, okay, like what is God trying to say? And I never figured out what he was saying. And then recently with these Palisade fires, God brought back to my memory when was speaking to me Palisade, a few years ago. And I was like, wow, that's why it rings a bell. I remember Googling what this word means and looking this up because I know that God was pointing this out to me. So, if you guys are not yet aware, I will let you know that the day before those fires broke out, there was something at the Golden Globes where a woman was basically saying, it was a joke, but she was basically saying like, oh, God, creator of the universe, gets zero mentions. And it was kind of like blasphemous at the awards. And the day after that is when the whole city basically just like set on fire, right? Which very sad for the people who live there, who, are just completely innocent. But I honestly have been feeling for a while now that like God's judgment is going to fall on LA. Also like Seattle, which is where like I'm from, north of Seattle. Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, Los Angeles. Like I am not surprised. I do think it's God's judgment on that area. And it's very sad. And I know that God hates to bring, like, he doesn't enjoy people suffering, obviously. But I do think that what happened was a direct result of what happened at the Golden Globes, as well as of an accumulation of just the constant kind of mockery of God and disregard for God or disbelief in God that you see in Los Angeles. Like, even the name Los Angeles, the city of the angels, I think it's kind of Satan loves to take things and then basically something that represents God, he will then turn it into a mockery. So it's like the city of the angels. He's going to try to make that city particularly dark and evil. But also the demons we know are fallen angels. So Los Angeles, it's even in the name. You look at Lucifer being, the head of music, in heaven before he fell, and how a third of the angels fell with him. Those were the creative angels. So that's why in our world, a lot of like the entertainment industry, the arts, it's all completely dominated by these like demonic forces. It's very demonic, very anti-God, very like flying in the face of the Bible, because everything in the arts, essentially the angels who fell, a lot of them were the creative ranks of angels. So it all kind of long story short, I'm not surprised by what happened with Los Angeles and that particular fire. As sad as it is for all the people who live there, I'm not surprised. We saw the same thing happen in Paris with the Olympics, with the only building not losing power being the church, with the mockery of the Last Supper and all of that. We saw it with that comedian who went on stage and made a joke about, God loves me the most. She fractured her skull. Like, I'm not saying that God's petty. I'm not saying he's violent. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that God will not be mocked. But he also doesn't want the wicked to perish. So I know that it makes God's heart sadder than anybody here. It makes God's heart sadder what's happening in LA. But anyway, back to the word Palisade. So I was like, why does that ring a bell? Palisade. I've heard that. And then I remembered looking up the name back in like 2022, knowing that God was speaking to me then. So if you look at the definition of the Palisade, which I just went over with you guys, that is essentially what Los Angeles has done to itself. It has basically completely set up, it's walled itself off, and it has basically wanted nothing to do with God. Like, God, you are not welcome here. You stay outside. Basically just this like line of sharpened spikes, basically just keeping out God. And that unfortunately is what they fell on and effectively impaled themselves. Back to that other word I mentioned. They basically fell on their own, I don't know the right word. They fell on their own palisade. They fell on their own defense structure that they created to keep God out for so long, which is ridiculous because you can't keep God. I mean, God is God. You don't have power to keep him out or in or whatever. But basically, Los Angeles and the celebrities and everybody for so long have done everything in their power to basically just put up this barrier, and they fell on it. They literally, like, it reached a point where they fell onto their palisade. And I don't think that that's a coincidence with that name and that being the specific part of LA that was burned. God is sending a message with the name and the meaning of the word Palisade. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that. God bless you guys. And I'd love to know, I don't know, what you guys think about it as well. But yeah, it brought back memories from 2022 and God highlighting that word to me. And just now I can see why he used that word. I mean, it was going to be the literal place that was burned, but that God is sending a message with that. The Hollywood Hills also, there was a fire that broke out in the Hollywood Hills, and that one was actually put out. So I was thinking like, oh gosh, this is it. Like, God's about to send a message. The Hollywood sign is going to be like on fire. That didn't happen. And I think a part of that has to do with the fact that there have been massive revival movements happening in California and LA. You do see God working there. So I think the fact that that particular, like the Hollywood Hills, that iconic landscape was not burned, God is giving grace, and he is basically saying, okay, like I've given you grace with this because God is coming back into California. So that's all I have to say. And I hope you guys have a great evening.